Hey, aloha, and welcome to the Hawaii Reopening Consortium webinar. This is the third of a series of 7 webinars happening every Tuesday. My name is Toby Tamai, and I am the president of a local agency called AT Marketing.
My name is Sandy Santiago Narvez, and I'm the Director of Sales and Marketing at the Ritz-Carlton Residences, Waikiki Beach. This series is a collaboration between the Travel Industry Management International and the Shidler College of Business Administration Alumni Association.
These webinars are offered at no cost by the 2 alumni associations. The webinars are designed to stimulate ideas for solutions that can be implemented by key tourism leaders, large and small business owners, employees working in the tourism industry, college students studying the travel industry related fields, and the general public. Topics include tourism, health and safety, an update on airline and hotel industries, restarting businesses in retail and dining, and a special webinar focused on the recovery of tourism from Japan. The goal of these seminars is to deliver information that can save small businesses, save jobs, and provide hope to our attendees with positive and forward-thinking messages. For those that missed out on our previous webinars, please visit the Shidler College page on Vimeo to watch any of the recordings.
So the idea for this series was born from a simple discussion that evolved into the realization of a need. We needed to hear from our leaders in our various industries. We needed them together, united, and we needed their help determining our own plans to reopen successfully. But ultimately, this series is about what you need. So please, if you have any questions for our panelists, go ahead and drop them in our Q&A box. Our moderators will monitor your questions and select as many as possible to review at the end of our webinar.
Since these seminars are during the lunch hour, we are featuring University of Hawaii Shidler College of Business or Travel Industry Management restaurants that are owned or managed by an alumni. Today's restaurant is Kaimaki Super Ed. Ed Kenny, an MBA of the Shidler College of Business, has amazing restaurants out there for you to visit. A special thanks to the University of Hawaii Shidler College of Business, the School of Travel Industry Management, and I also like to mention the producers behind this webinar today, Evan Leong, CEO of Brain Gain Hawaii, John Doyle, Technical Director of the Department of Defense, and Buddy Leong, Executive Director of Virtual Student Experiences.
Additionally, this Thursday, we are launching a fundraising campaign called Shidler Strong. Your contributions will go to the Shidler College of Business, which directs these funds to student development, mentoring, and networking opportunities to connect our talented business community. Please visit the UH Shidler College of Business website for more details. All right, let's get on to the webinar. Our first speaker is Mr. Tim Sakahara. Tim serves as the Communications Director for the Hawaii Department of Transportation, which consists of 15 airports, 10 commercial harbors, and more than 2,500 lane miles of highways across the state. He speaks on behalf of the 2,600 employees diligently working to keep Hawaii's transportation system moving forward. Prior to joining the state in January 2015, Sakahara was an award-winning journalist. He reported in television markets in Hawaii, California, Oklahoma, and Oregon, where in addition to covering transportation stories, his assignments included chasing tornadoes, hurricanes, and tsunamis. In addition to being a dedicated public servant, Sakahara is active in the community and regularly volunteers for various educational and charitable organizations. Sakahara is a proud graduate of UCLA, where he earned a degree in political science. Welcome to the webinar, Tim.
All right, aloha. Thank you very much for that, Sandy. And thank you to the UH Shidler College of Business, Alumni Association, and everyone who put this on for inviting me to participate, especially appearing on such a distinguished panel with the partners from the airline industry. Thank you also to Lance and Nina, Sandy, Toby, and Buddy for the coordination. And of course, everyone who's taken their lunch break to listen in. Thank you to everyone who's online now. It is interesting because last week, I did a similar webinar like this with members of the Healthcare Association, and I imagine today I may get a very different point of view from that one. And of course, keep in mind the details evolve quickly, and we're all having to adapt to the ever-changing conditions. So we thank you and all the businesses and the public for its patience as the state navigates through the pandemic. It is certainly a situation where it frankly is impossible to please everyone. And with that in mind, I will do my best to try to provide a summary of what travelers can expect when flying to Hawaii when they reach our airports. And I'll also try to provide some highlights and updates from some of the recent talking points from Governor Ige and Lieutenant Governor Josh Green that they've recently said. So Hawaii is still set to restart on October 15th with the pre-travel testing program. And I do say restart just because reopen technically isn't correct because Hawaii never closed, but people did have to abide by the 14-day mandatory quarantine upon arrival. Now, people will have the option of quarantine for the 14 days if they so choose, but they'll also have that option of getting a negative COVID test 72 hours from the departure of their flight to Hawaii in order to bypass that quarantine. Now, it is important to note the state of Hawaii will only accept test results from the trusted testing partners and the travel partners that are out there. And there is a list on the hawaiicovid19.com webpage as well, if anyone would like that for reference. So when a trans-Pacific traveler arrives in Hawaii, they will get off the plane and immediately have their temperature taken. We no longer are stopping each traveler one-on-one and to take their temperature. Instead, we've installed some new thermal screening temperature equipment that has been installed at every gate and every TSA checkpoint at the 5 major airports in the state, which of course are Honolulu, Kahului, Lihue, Kona, and Hilo. Now, if a passenger does have an elevated temperature of 100.4 degrees Fahrenheit or above, they will be pulled aside for additional medical screening. And depending on their symptoms, they will have the option of going to the emergency room if necessary, and or having a COVID-19 sample taken right there. Those who do not have a fever will proceed to the passenger verification stations. So travelers will have already at this point set up their Safe Travels account on the Safe Travels webpage. And within 24 hours of that flight to Hawaii, people will have submitted their form, which includes travel and health questions. And once submitted, they will be emailed a QR code back. Now, each adult traveler and unaccompanied minor entering the state will need to have that valid email address. It is a requirement. Everyone will need an email. When they arrive at the airport, the screeners will scan that QR code to pull up their account and then verify the information is all correct by checking the passenger's ID, calling their cell phone to ensure it rings right in front of them, and confirming their hotel reservation and length of stay. And once all of that is verified, their account will have a green check mark and they'll be free to leave. If there is a red X on their account, it will just mean that either they didn't fill out the form correctly or they answered yes to some of the health questions that would require an additional screening and some additional questions. Now, all that stays the same, is in place now, but on and after October 15th, that will continue, however, with the additional step of verifying the negative test if people come in with their negative test result. There is the option for people to upload their test result to their Safe Travels account as soon as they receive it. And people should also remember to bring a copy of their result, either a printed copy or have it on their phone ready to go just in case. Kind of like when people are traveling internationally, they kind of keep their passport handy. It's going to be a good idea, especially in the beginning, to have that negative test result handy as well. All right, some additional highlights that from the governor's news conference last week, and I should say actually in a couple hours, the governor is going to be having another news conference with some updated information. But just so everyone is aware, to recap in case people didn't hear, Hawaii does have a list of 12 partners who will be working on the pre-travel testing, including some of our airlines who are here on this call. Hawaii will receive 420,000 Abbott rapid antigen tests from the federal government by the end of the year. These are the 15-minute tests. However, these are specifically going to be used at first, at least, for long-term healthcare centers and the schools. The Lieutenant Governor also announced that surveillance testing is planned and being worked on. So 4 days after the traveler enters Hawaii, they would get a second test, but really mainly for data collection and research. Now, this second test would be voluntary, at least at the start, in the Lieutenant Governor's plan, to help see if people are coming in and for additional research and data purposes. It will be voluntary, but the expectation is still to get about 10% of the travelers to come in and take this second test. It will be free for them to take this test. And they're also working out possible incentives to try to get people to comply, because they want to do have a broad age range per island and area where they're coming from. So there could be a gift card or something like that as an incentive for people. And just to close, for perspective, last year at this time, there were more than 31,000 people arriving into the state every single day. Now, of course, there's less than 2,000 people arriving today, a day. It's a drop of more than 94%. And so it is a significant decrease. However, with the October 15th pre-travel program starting, there's optimism that those numbers will increase, and Hawaii, with its exposure to the people and passengers, will resume. And thanks again for having me.
Thank you, Tim, for everything you do for the community, and really that incredible explanation about what is happening when we arrive at the airport. Next up is Avi Manis. He is the Senior Vice President of Marketing of Hawaiian Airlines, a position he has held since July 2014. Manis is responsible for Hawaiian Airlines' brand, product, advertising, promotions, direct marketing, and direct sales and service channels. Manis joined Hawaiian Airlines in July 2007 as a Senior Director of Transformation. Prior to Hawaiian Airlines, he worked at the Boston Consulting Group in New York City and Paris, France, and at Christie's Auction House in New York City. Mr. Manis is also a graduate of Brown University and earning a BA with honors in Old World Archaeology and Art. He went on to earn his MBA from the University of Penn, Wharton School of Business. Mahalo, Avi Manis, for taking the time to be with us today on a very busy week.
Thank you, Toby, and thank you everyone for being here and for having us. We're delighted to be here to talk a little more about what is going on broadly in aviation in the industry and what we're seeing in Hawaii as well. And I was delighted to see two of our terrific leaders who are also Shidler grads participating as moderators in this session. So I look forward to engaging with them on the panel. In terms of what's going on overall in the industry, if you look at the domestic US aviation industry, traffic remains down at the moment about 70% year over year. About a third of the US commercial airline fleet is grounded at the moment. And when we compare this to history, if you think about the major events in aviation, this has been a more significant impact and a slower recovery than September 11th, which was the last even remotely comparable crisis in the history of our business. So if you look at September 11th, in September 2001, there was about a 30% decline in air travelers within the US. That was back to being down about 15% year over year by the fourth month after that terrible event. If we think about COVID by comparison, in the first month, which I would count as March of 2020, which is when there was first real significant impact to domestic travel, we had about a 50% decline in the first month. And that continued to get worse. It got to around 90% at one point. And in the fourth month after the start of that, we were still down about 80% year over year. So this is clearly a crisis without precedent in the airline industry. And the first thing that I would do is just to salute the incredible professionalism of our frontline teams during this crisis. And this is Hawaiians, but really all of the US airlines. There's no work from home option for frontline workers in the airline industry. And throughout this crisis, even with less travel, the critical infrastructure workers of the airline industry have been out there tirelessly working to do what needed to happen to get first responders where they needed to be in the US to support the essential travel needs of both our community here in Hawaii and around the US. And so I just really want to make sure that we recognize and express gratitude for their work and their sacrifice during this period of time. If we think specifically about Hawaii, the impact of COVID on air travel for Hawaii has really been unique, both because we are unique in our dependence on air travel and because we have been unique in our enforcement of the quarantine. Alaska and some other states have imposed travel quarantines, but no state has imposed that quarantine with the same zeal for enforcement that has happened in Hawaii. And so the effect was to suppress demand. And it did so, as Tim mentioned, quite successfully. Traffic dropped by 97, 98% travel trans-Pacific and international. And so it's made it very hard, and we'll talk, I'm sure there'll be interest in talking about what demand for travel is going forward. It's made it very hard for us to gauge what the underlying demand is because the quarantine so thoroughly suppressed demand for travel. I think it's important to observe that the 98% of the people who would have come elected not to. They did the respectful thing, understood the concerns of our community and didn't travel. But the ones who did come obviously created headlines and did some lasting damage to our brand as a destination. And that's something that I think we have to face and recover from going forward. The inter-island quarantine also suppressed travel there. So if you think about the neighbor island travel network as being something that in previous periods would have transported about 20,000 people a day, now with the quarantine imposed, it's down to 1,000 or 2,000 people per day. During the period when it was temporarily lifted, that doubled to around 4,000 or 5,000 travelers per day. What happens with the inter-island quarantine is still very much an open question. I think that remains to be seen. Clearly, air travel is part of the sort of economic lifeblood of this community, and it's hard to imagine sustaining an economic recovery without the free movement of people between the islands. There are clearly some challenging policy decisions to be made there. And it's unclear what that's going to be. From our perspective, the notion of imposing the same sort of PCR testing regime that's been put in place for trans-Pacific travel really doesn't make sense either economically or logistically when you think about the volumes of travel and the cost of a ticket relative to the cost of a test, which is quite expensive. At Hawaiian, as we've worked through this, our focus has been on making sure that we're operating safely, first and foremost, both for our guests and for our employees, taking on debt to make sure that we have enough liquidity to get us through this crisis. And that's an area where we as a big business in the visitor industry here with a strong balance sheet and lots of unencumbered assets have been at a significant advantage. We've been able to go out and take on hundreds of millions of dollars of debt to get us through this. That is not a luxury that a mom and pop business in our community that is struggling to survive without visitors has. And so we feel fortunate in that respect. But those are things that we're going to have to live with and pay off over the course of the decade to come. And lastly, we've had to make hard decisions to conserve cash. We've had to figure out how we can reduce our cash burn, which has been around $3 million per day to ensure that we're able to survive. And those are decisions that have a personal weight beyond just the economic impact. On October 1st, when the federal payroll support expired, we parted ways with almost 2,500 of our employees, about a third of our workforce. And many of those were through voluntary retirements. We had a lot of people who took early retirement earlier than they would have wanted to end their career because they knew that by doing so, they would preserve a place for someone younger who might need the job more. These were people who, as I've been in this business for the last 13 years, have been mentors to me, who have taught me what hospitality means. And so it's been tremendously difficult, the human cost of this economic calamity that's faced our community. So what lies ahead from our perspective? First and foremost, as we think just about our community, I think we face some real humanitarian crisis. I think we face some generational impacts. Those are economic impacts. Those are household, food, and housing insecurity, disparities in access to education. All of these are things that I think we've seen looming for a while, and I think are now essentially inevitable given the lagging effects of those things. There are things that are going to strain our social safety net as a community at a time when the absence of tourism also means that there aren't revenues coming into government to be able to fund the measures that we will need to ensure the well-being of our community. And these things, again, food and housing insecurity, access to education, access to healthcare are drivers and determinants of healthcare, of health outcomes in our community. And so it's something that we're very concerned about. And the only thing that we feel really can start to blunt the impact of that crisis is reopening our economy safely. And that's why we have been so focused on that. And that sounds very grim, but there's reason to be hopeful because we know that there is a way to do that successfully. If we do that, there's actually a good sense to believe that airlift is going to return fairly robustly. The grounded fleets I talked about a third of the US fleet being grounded, those are largely grounded in short-term storage right now. There are levels of storage you can put aircraft into. And I think most airlines are keeping their fleet ready to return so that when demand returns, they can bring aircraft back. We believe that demand for leisure travel is going to return faster than demand for business travel. And again, that favors places like Hawaii, destinations like Hawaii. And we're already seeing a bit of that with destinations that have reopened. So we're seeing US airlines start to reconfigure their networks to take advantage of the increased proportion of leisure travelers. If you look at places like Florida and Palm Springs, some of the winter resort destinations in Mexico, we're already seeing them start to benefit from additional air service. That's critically important for a community like ours that depends on air service. And what is most important for us as a community is that we implement a layered system of protections that allow us to safely reopen our economy. And no one measure is going to be sufficient. And all of them will need to work together in order to ensure that we can keep our community safe. And those involve things like testing, which we're launching this week. And we think that will be an important, but not, again, individually sufficient part of the solution. Screening, contact tracing, aggressive and effective public health interventions when we do have someone who arrives in the community who is positive. We believe very strongly that those public health measures and screening and testing need to be embedded deeply in our community, not just in resort areas and in airports, because ultimately the issue and the concern from an epidemiological standpoint is not just tourists coming here from other places. It is locals who return and travel and are more deeply embedded in our community. So we need to make sure that we have those measures in place everywhere. We need to implement these in a pragmatic and data-driven manner. We are not going to be able to reduce to zero the number of cases that are introduced through travel. What we do need to do is ensure that we put enough measures in place that we can manage those within the healthcare capacity of our state, which we have at the moment. And we need to move quickly and we need to move forward, because every day that we delay the reopening of our economy, the lagging consequences for our community become more dire. So we are optimistic. We believe that there is a path forward now. We are working really hard with our partners in the industry, in the airports, in the state, and throughout the hospitality industry to ensure that we make this reopening a success. And then the last thing I'll say is that I have a number of my colleagues from around the airline industry on this panel with me. And while we are fierce competitors commercially, there's been an enormous amount of collaboration and sharing and cooperation between the airlines when it comes to safety. That is not an area on which we compete. And so there's been terrific sharing of data and best practices. And I know Daniel's going to talk about that, so I'll leave it with him to share more of some of the extraordinary measures we've done to keep our guests and our employees safe. Mahalo.
Mahalo, Avi, for those updates and for all that Hawaiian does to show genuine care for our community. Now, Daniel Chen is the Hawaii Director of Sales, Community, and Public Relations for Alaska Airlines. He leads the airline sales, marketing, public affairs, and community outreach efforts throughout the state of Hawaii. Chen has nearly 2 decades of experience in Hawaii's tourism industry, starting at the Hawaii Visitors and Convention Bureau, where he helped to develop internal travel to the islands. Chen then served for 7 years as the special assistant to the state of Hawaii's governor-appointed tourism liaison, where he coordinated with government agencies and the visitor industry on tourism-related matters. Prior to joining Alaska, Chen was the executive director of the Honolulu Gay and Lesbian Cultural Foundation, an umbrella organization for the Honolulu Rainbow Film Festival. In 2019, Chen was appointed to the Hawaii Tourism Authority Board of Directors by Hawaii Governor David Ige. Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you, Sandy. And aloha, everyone. And really mahalo to the Shidler Alumni Association and Team International for the invitation to join all of you today. As we start to welcome travelers back to Hawaii this week and more of us start to return to the skies, I really wanted to take some time today to talk about how the airline industry, Alaska included, has been working to earn your confidence as you start to fly again. As airlines, we know that we have an important role in promoting safe travel to the islands. So we continue to work with state and tourism leaders to ensure that our guests will understand the shared responsibility we all have as out-of-state travel to Hawaii resumes. And really now more than ever, we are emphasizing the personal role that our guests have in protecting the health and safety of themselves, others, and their communities. So I'm going to use a few examples from Alaska, but of course it's because what I know. But as Avi said, while airlines compete fiercely in the marketplace, safety is one area that we oftentimes will share best practices and will adopt standards across the industry. This certainly is isn't more true than now. So whether it's how Hawaiian is keeping you safe, United's Clean Plus, ANA's Care Promise, or what we at Alaska call Next Level Care, you can feel confident in the industry's collective efforts to keep you safe whenever you're ready to fly again. So talking about Alaska's Next Level Care, it's comprised of over 100 actions designed to offer layers of safety, as Avi was talking about, which, as we all know, is the key to reducing risk, as there's really no one silver bullet that takes care of everything. This includes HEPA filtration on our aircraft, masks, and face covering requirements for all of our guests and employees, and much more. Like most other airlines, we've drawn on the expertise of medical experts, which in our case are medical and infectious disease experts from the University of Washington Medical Center. And each layer of safety has undergone a rigorous assessment to ensure that it provides the maximum protection and reduces the level of risk to the traveling public. So we believe that all these actions taken together are making a difference. In a recent post-flight survey that we did of our guests, 82% shared that they had a safe and healthy environment, while 95% said that their seat area was clean. We're evolving our practices and policies as knowledge of the COVID-19 virus continues to improve. So in fact, the industry, including Alaska, is partnering with the Aviation Public Health Initiative at Harvard University to thoroughly look at safety measures in the industry. They've already published 2 bulletins, one on mask use on board and the other on disinfection practices. One model referenced in the mask bulletin shows that with universal mask usage combined with the airflow and circulation on board modern aircraft, the chances of catching COVID-19 on board is less than 1%. So speaking of airflow within the cabin, it's probably one of the most surprising topics. It definitely was for me, at least. Studies have shown that aircraft cabin air filtration is comparable to what is found in hospitals due to the frequency of air circulation or air recirculation on board. Like most of the industry, each of our aircraft are equipped with systems that contain 2 HEPA, which is high efficiency particulate air filters, which are 99.9% effective or greater in removing particulate contaminants, including viruses like COVID-19 and other bacteria from recirculated air. Cabin air flows from the ceiling to the floor to direct the airflow away from other passengers. And our air filtration system cycles outside air on board every 2 to 3 minutes, which is about 20 to 30 times an hour, which is more frequently than many other indoor environments. Guests can open their personal air vent to increase filtered air at their seat. According to the CDC, because of how air circulates and is filtered on airplanes, most viruses and other germs do not spread easily on flights. Also, the top engineer at Airbus has said that even if you sneeze, within a minute, there's nothing left around you. The fact that you're seated for a couple hours next to somebody doesn't represent a higher risk than being in another area where you will be close to people for a given period of time, like in shops, for example. But there, the air doesn't necessarily move around very much. And Boeing has said that cabin air flows primarily from ceiling to floor in a circular pattern and leaves through the floor grills near the same seat where it enters. This helps minimize the front to back air movement and helps to limit the potential spread of contaminants. So I mentioned how we're counting on both our guests and employees to keep each other safe. You've heard it many times before, but masks and face coverings play an important role in reducing the spread of infection between individuals. This is more important, or even more important, on board an aircraft. This is why airlines are requiring a cloth mask and covering for all guests and employees during the duration of the flight, including boarding and deplaning. For Alaska, it's no mask, no travel, no exceptions. Guests who refuse to wear a mask will not be permitted to board the aircraft, and guests who refuse to wear a mask during the flight will be issued a warning. For us, it's in the form of a yellow card that's handed to them, and it will result in suspension of their ability to fly in the future. And many other airlines have accepted or have that policy as well. I haven't mentioned all of our enhanced cleaning protocols, such as electrostatic spraying and fogging procedures, but as I'm sure you've heard, all airlines are working around the clock to sanitize kiosks, gate areas, cabins, and key touch points, including tray tables, armrests, seatbelts, lavatories, you name it, with EPA-approved disinfectants. So hopefully some of this gives you added confidence in the safety of flying. And I thought I'd close by noting a few things that you can do to help the next time that you're on board. We are all transforming the check-in process to reduce touch points for passengers. You can download all of our mobile apps so that you can make sure your trip is as smooth and contactless as possible. You can proceed straight to the TSA when arriving at the airport. We have print at home options for both the boarding pass and bag tags, and our agents now can even scan your boarding pass from 6 feet away. To limit interaction between flight crews and guests, many of us have temporarily reduced in-flight food and beverage service. So feel free to bring your own snacks on board. And we also encourage you to bring your own refillable water bottle as well. In addition to keeping that mask on at all times, remember to keep your distance from others and be patient when boarding and deplaning. Travel during this time will be different, and we all need to do our part to protect each other, reduce our risk, and be able to live safely with this virus for the time being. So with that said, I just want to thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to having a conversation with everyone at the end. Mahalo.
Hey, thank you, Daniel, for that thorough explanation. I definitely feel confident to fly again. Next up is our voice representing the Japanese travel market. Hiroshi Shibata is Vice President and General Manager of the Honolulu office of All Nippon Airways, a position he has held since April 2017. Mr. Shibata has been with the company for 33 years. Currently, Mr. Shibata is responsible for management of the Honolulu office, such as operation of regular flight service from their Honolulu routes, labor management of locally hired employees and home staff from Japan, supervising of handling companies and coordinating matters with external partners in Honolulu as the local representative here. Welcome to the discussion, Mr. Shibata.
Thank you, Toby. Aloha, everyone. My name is Hiroshi Shibata, General Manager of ANA Honolulu office. Thank you for this opportunity to speak to you about the current situation in Hawaii and Japan. Today, I'd like to talk about what ANA has been working on, what we are doing now, and what we are expected to do in the future. Next page, please. First, let's review ANA's business before COVID-19. In May 2019, the A380 was launched. It was the first time in Hawaii. According to our original business plan for 2020, we plan to increase with another A380 aircraft, which would increase our fleet to a total 3 A380, painted blue, green, and orange, and plan to operate all of the double daily Narita flights by June. The seat capacity of the A380 is 520 seats, and with the addition to the Boeing 787 Haneda flight, total airlift was planned to be 1,286 seats per day. Second, it was the first time that ANA provided elite first-class services to the high-end customers to Honolulu. In addition, we have also created a 10,000 square feet airport lounge. No other carrier has this capability. And the most unique and popular point is the exclusive boarding gate. We can access directly to the A380's upper deck from the gate. Customers were very pleased with these services. Next, in ANA's accomplishment in the community, we have created a music event called ANA Honolulu Music Week 2019. which will contribute to enhance direct communication with the local community and the development of music education in Hawaii. Next, as a part of so-called responsible tourism initiative and to contribute to eco-friendly in Hawaii was the sponsorship of Vicky and introduction of the shuttle bus between Waikiki and Ala centers with a 100% electrical bus that does not emit noise or exhaust emissions. In addition to being eco-friendly, we have planned 520 middle trees and set up a beach cleaning at Ala Center Beach. The number of 520 is the honor of the seater of A380. Unfortunately, due to the influence of COVID-19, all flights were suspended from March 29. The orange painted A380 has been postponed until further notice. All of these initiatives and activities are currently suspended, except for sponsorship to Wiki. I'm very disappointed as well as everyone's thought related to tourism. Next page, please. As you know, all travel demands have disappeared due to the prohibited travel by both governments from late March. Past March 20, Governor Ige's statements request to postpone travel to Hawaii. Personally, I will never forget this day. I was on vacation with my family on a trip to Kauai. I received an urgent call from a staff member hired locally in Hawaii. She said over the phone, according to internet, the governor had announced a request to postpone the travel trip to Hawaii. You should immediately cancel your vacation, return to Honolulu, and suspend any flights. I was very shocked to hear. She would throw out a business without considering a return flight of Japanese. Also, shock ran in Japan as well, and the number of incoming Japanese dropped sharply. And in March 26, Hawaii State imposed mandatory 14-day quarantine for entering in Hawaii. And March 31st, Japanese government raised infection advisory to level 3 for US, including Hawaii. And sales of package tours are prohibited in Japan. April 3, Japanese government expanded the entry bans to US citizens. And also for all returning Japanese, infection tests will be conducted upon arrival in Japan. And only negative person can enter, but request 14-day quarantine. All travel demands were eliminated. So under these circumstances, ANA conduct air tours using A380 in August and September in order to maintain the atmosphere for travel to Hawaii as much as possible. It takes about 90 minutes to fly over Japan, but they can feel Hawaii, of course, flying by A380 and providing Hawaiian cocktails in-flight movies related to Hawaii, overflying not only Mount Fuji, but also Izu Oshima Island, so-called Japanese Mauna Kea. You can visit and to check Izu Oshima Island website. You can see a lot of similar landscape. A lot of customers applied the flight more than 100 times the capacity. We have realized the strength of Hawaii's value once again. In addition, we have learned that there are many repeaters who want to know the current situation in Hawaii. And we plan to hold a live Hawaii travel briefing, preparing for future overseas travel using Zoom and other facilities. We will continue to strive to attract more customers when it's resumed. This alone shows how popular Hawaii is to Japanese travelers, and it hopes to future travel in the near future. Next page, please. So this is shown the air tours. We use A380 and in-flight services. All passengers get together with wearing aloha and enjoy Hawaii time above. So next page, please. So, what should we do in the future? First, I hope that Hawaii State issues a message. That Hawaii State issued a message to resume accepting tourism from Japan. The shock of March 70 that many Japanese received should be dispelled first. Second, slowly reduce regulations step by step. So to lift foreigners self-quarantine in Hawaii, it will have to proceed with the application of the pre-travel testing program to Japan, which applies to travelers from the mainland. It means that Hawaii State allows Japan to participate in pre-travel testing program to accept negative PCR tests at Japanese clinics and laboratories before departure from Japan. Also, I think it is important for both travelers and local community to practice safety protocol for tourism-related people in Hawaii and to reduce new infection and infection rates. ANA has already announced our safety protocol, including the series of air travel named ANA Care Promise. With these factors, I think the most important thing is to learn to quarantine in Japan and the lower travel risk level for Hawaii from level 3 to level 2. It is related to the start of self-package tours. In Japan and the United States, there are different laws and environment related to medical practice. So I'd like to look forward to the effort taken by state governments. One option is for the Japanese government to consider separating Hawaii from the United States territory and abolish mandatory tests. Anyway, if the infection is suppressed, the inspection will be abolished. The recent number of infected people per 100,000 population is 770 in Hawaii and 70 in Japan. So there is various tourism demand. In December, Honolulu Marathon, as well as Christmas and year-end holidays. In February and March, there is also the need for Japanese students to travel on graduation trips. Also, don't forget the Olympic Games to be held in Tokyo next summer. In spring, normalization is strongly expected. There will be a mix of expectations and concern, but I hope that airlines, travel companies, hotels, and all concerned parties will work together to resume travel, and ANA will continue to play a part in this effort. Let's get over it together. Thank you and mahalo.
Thank you, Mr. Shibata. I cannot wait to go to Japan again in the future. Jeff Tarpey is based on Maui as the Regional General Manager for United Airlines. He is responsible for airport operations and customer service through the 4 neighbor island airport teams. Jeff has over 25 years of work experience in Hawaii and lives on Oahu, Kauai, and Maui. His community involvement includes volunteer service among several boards and teams, including HBCB Island chapters, Maui Community Strategic Plan, and the Mayor's Task Force. Jeff and his wife enjoy spending time with his family, world travel and culture, and enjoying the outdoors. Thank you, Jeff.
Sandy, thank you so much. Aloha, everybody. It's nice to meet you, and it's really nice to be with everyone today. I really appreciate the invitation for United to join. My other airline colleagues, they've done a great job explaining the sense of things right now, not only in our industry, but for the customers that we all come into contact with, our residents, one another, and of course, visitors when that starts up. ANA is one of our wonderful Star Alliance partners, and Hawaiian is just a fantastic code share partner. United has a really large presence here and a proud heritage here in Hawaii all these years. This crisis has hurt us all. It's caused us to evaluate our present flight schedule, but it has not affected our long-term commitment here in Hawaii. We also have other countries around the world that depend on connecting here, and we look forward to welcoming them back just at the right time. So our shared purpose is all about connecting people and uniting the world. We're going to continue to operate safely, and we're going to do it with a nice customer experience across our 5 airports, from Lihue all the way to Hilo. We have a clean experience, much like how the other my colleagues here have described. And we're really happy with our partnership that we have with Clorox and the Cleveland Clinic that formed what is our new United Clean Plus program. It's a layered approach. What we're doing is we're focusing on providing a really safe and a fantastic customer experience. Our customers are going to find that they can have a touchless environment, and once they're on board, after the aircraft has been completely disinfected and sprayed, electrostatic spraying, they're going to even receive a personal alcohol wipe and a greeting as they board the aircraft. They'll be able to use that for their own personal use. We're looking after everyone at all the different points of their journey, not only for safety and compliance, but just to help restart travel as people begin flying again. And for some people, that's going to feel like a first-time flight when that starts up again. I wanted to say, we just really appreciate the good relationships that we have with all of us here in Hawaii, our government officials, our business partners, especially here in the region. I want to give a big thanks to our wonderful employees. They've also adjusted to the new requirements, and many of them under these situations have signed up for different leaves of absence just to help save jobs. They also are committed to being strong when this thing is over. And our business plan is really all about being prepared for what's happening right now, and also to be strong and ready so that when the time is right, we can rebound really well out of this pandemic and continue to serve the world and Hawaii for passengers and cargo. It is that shared purpose of connecting people and uniting the world, and that's what we're all about right now. And I know we're going to talk about some other things on the panel today, so maybe I'll leave it shorter and let the questions come, and be happy to participate in any questions that you may have. Thanks a lot for the time and the introduction.
Hey, thank you, Jeff. Very looking forward to seeing everything United's going to be doing for us.
Thank you, Toby.
Next up is our panel discussion and the Q&A part of our webinar. If you guys have not left any questions in the Q&A, please do so. We're very interested to hear what you want us to say. Today's panel will be led by 2 University of Hawaii Shidler College of Business Board of Directors and are both executives of Hawaiian Airlines. Nina Bocasecho is a senior manager, and Lance Higa is a senior director for the airline. Welcome to the discussion, Nina and Lance.
Thank you, Toby.
Thanks, Toby. Anyway, first off, thank you guys all for your participation, our distinguished panelists, and for everyone tuning in. I think this is a very important discussion, and I think the intent of getting the message out that it is safe is really the core of what we're trying to do today. So what we'll do is we'll start with a few questions. We have 5 questions that I'll ask, and I'll call on each of the panelists individually, and then I'll turn it over to Nina, who will ask 5 questions of the individual panelists as well. So we'll start with Tim Sakahara. So the first question is, does everyone need to create a Safe Travels account, and what happens if they refuse?
Yeah, thanks, Lance, and thanks for the question. And the simple answer is yes. All of the travelers do need to have a Safe Travels account form. That's all adults and all of the unaccompanied minors. And keep in mind, like, there's also the Department of Agriculture form that people may be used to when they fill out, and the flight crew will distribute it, they'll fill out, and it'll be collected prior to landing. In that case, it's only one per family that needs to do it. But in the safe travels case, even if it's a couple coming together and spouses, both spouses would need to create a safe travels form, an account, and then fill out their, answer those health and travel questions prior to landing and prior to doing the passenger screening at the airport. So yes, they all do. It is mandatory. As to the question if they refuse, well, there are some options. They will have to take the next flight back to where they came from, which has happened several hundred times since the quarantine was started at the end of March, and continues to happen from people. Or they will be directed to law enforcement that is at the airports as well. So it is mandatory to fill out that health and travel form in the Safe Travels webpage.
Thanks, Tim. Do you think it's an issue of not knowing or an issue of just obstinance?
In the beginning, there was definitely cases of people flying in and not knowing about the mandatory quarantine. And so there were cases of people coming in, not realizing it and saying, well, heck, I'm only here for a week. I'm not going to spend it on my hotel, so I'm going to just fly home. Thanks to the airlines I've also been very accommodating in that case, to fly them directly back to where they came from. In some cases, the state and the VASH, the Visitor Law Society program, has helped pay for to send people back as well. That's happened a few hundred times as well. And then other cases, it is just people, quite frankly, who have been kind of obstinate and said, stated that it was a violation, and they have fought it. And there have been people that have been arrested as a result. So there's a little bit of both.
Thanks, Tim. Appreciate that. Next question is for Avi. So obviously, throughout our 90-year history at Hawaiian, we've become an integral part of the community. How will Hawaiian and the other airlines balance what's best for business versus what's best for the community during the pandemic?
Thanks, Lance. So I think, as we've thought about this crisis from the very beginning, it was clearly important to us that we continue to support our community through this. And Hawaiian and all the airlines that serve Hawaii have a track record of volunteerism and support of the community. For us, it was clear that food insecurity was going to be a major issue. And so we've been very focused on that, on supporting the food banks in our communities. Doing that even at a time when we were having to establish food banks for our own employees. And so again, this is not the economic crisis that's facing us is not going to leave any member of our community untouched. And so it was incredibly important that we be engaged on that from the very beginning, working to support merchants and restaurants and the small businesses in our community through our credit card program. In the slightly longer term, I think it's going to be important for all of the airlines to engage in a constructive dialogue about the future of tourism here. One of the things that has happened with COVID is it has laid bare a lot of the tensions that have existed in our community for a long time about the benefits and the costs of tourism. And I think we have to be engaged in that discussion in a positive way. And then thinking even longer time horizon, when we are hopefully beyond COVID and have learned to live with it and manage our economy, one of the biggest issues facing us as a community will be climate change. And I think airlines need to, in this time, not forget our role to play in that. We are emitters of carbon in a big way, and we have a lot to do to ensure that in the long term we remain sustainable. And we can't let this crisis distract us from that long-term focus either.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Avi. For Daniel, at the peak of the shutdown when most flights in and out of Hawaii were suspended, how much input did the airlines have with local government in regards to reopening tourism, and how many of the airlines could participate on having a seat in those meetings?
Sure. Well, thanks, Lance. I think I'd really like to start off by saying, as Jeff mentioned, we really appreciate the relationship that we have with the state, all throughout this crisis from the very beginning. I do feel like we were able to communicate very openly with them. And we had regular meetings, at least all of the government affairs representatives from the domestic carriers were able to meet with the Department of Transportation. We had several meetings with the governor. And so I do think that we had some type of communication and interaction with our state leaders. I will also say that, a lot of grace, I think, can be given to our state leaders. This is not an easy thing. And this is also not business as usual at all, right? And so the ability to communicate and how to share information is something that is quite challenging. And I think we have seen that throughout this entire pandemic. What I think some of the frustration might have been is that we communicate to our guests, and a lot of times we might also just get the information from the media sometimes, and that's a tough thing, but that is sort of how it is in this situation. And so I think short answer to your question, I think we absolutely did have a seat at the table. And I would also like to hear from Hawaiian and also United. I do think that, see what their thoughts are on this question.
Avi or Jeff, you guys want to chime in?
Sure. Yeah, I would echo some of what Daniel said. I think, the governor certainly set the tone of being collaborative and inclusive in the discussions. And I think the airlines had a lot to contribute to that dialogue, not just in terms of how the air travel system works, but also because we're used to solving complex logistical problems and using technology. And so we tried to bring some of what we know to contribute to that discussion. That doesn't mean agreeing with every decision that's been made. Again, I don't envy the policymakers who had to make these decisions. They had a lot of stakeholders. They're really complex. Today, I think it's clear not everyone agrees on what the answer is. What's most important for our industry, and I think for our state, is that we move forward with a plan, however imperfect it is, that we find a way to start and move forward together.
Jeff.
Yes, we have had good relationships with the leaders from the governor's office and with the state of Hawaii Airports Division, locally through the counties, through their various infrastructure and government offices. But our government affairs person has been very involved in helping to collaborate around solutions. I think Daniel mentioned earlier that we don't compete on safety. We share best practices with each other. We share ideas for the better good. And I think that's the way it's been, that people have related to each other. And I think through our relationships more at the state level, what we're hoping to see is there's more of a clear, unified way of understanding how business or how tourism, how the movement of passengers will actually work. Recognizing there may be differences by county, just having a clear sense of that so people have some assurances.
Thank you, Jeff. Good points. For Shibata-san, currently Japan allows foreign travel between various Asian countries such as Vietnam, Thailand, and soon to be South Korea. Can you explain a little bit about the departure testing requirements and what happens for Japanese nationals returning from these countries back to Japan?
Yes, thank you for the question. Currently, Japan has agreement with 16 countries in Asia and Oceania. Departing passengers must show a pre-test negative result in Narita or Haneda Airport prior to departure. When landing in destination countries such as Vietnam, Thailand, etc., you have to show them the same pre-test paperwork. Arriving back into Narita or Haneda, they take a test upon arrival. The requirement to quarantine when coming back to Japan have different conditions to meet the destination government approval. At this time, any Japanese citizen arriving on a flight from Hawaii needs to quarantine for 14 days, even if they test negative at the airport.
Okay, so it's very, very similar to what we experience here. Thank you very much, Shibata-san. And to Jeff, with many hotels, vacation rentals, Airbnbs impacted by COVID, resulting in some closures and temporary shutdowns, reducing inventory, is United working with some of the providers to ensure that there are ample rooms available as travel starts to pick up?
Right. Okay. Yes, we are, but it's really mostly about sharing information with one another, and that's all through relationships, right? From my point of view, I've heard no concerns about having an appropriate level of accommodation and choices for customers. People will be able to choose from what are allowed by law or just what's allowed by their choice, and I don't sense that there'll be any limits or anything that would reduce our reopening of things here. These conversations, though, they're very informal, right? And they're through local community and airport relationships. There might be a situation where we talk about some upcoming flight schedules, and they might talk a little bit about their reopening plans. And so it's not as much about ensuring that the accommodations will be okay from an airline point of view. It's really that we understand that we live in this space together. And while we may bring the people here, and certainly they need a place to go, from our point of view, we do see a readiness, and we see their business plans be really smart about protecting their employees, as well as being ready for when opening starts. We have the ability to scale our flights to the demand and move our aircraft around. Obviously, that's a lot different from the accommodations. And we can do that within just about a month's timing as we work on crew resources and routings and things like that. But things keep changing. And I think the name of the game is continue to communicate openly as these changes come up. We'll be bringing in some additional flights shortly, and from the sense of it, accommodations and the rest of the industry should be no problem for that.
Excellent. Thank you, Jeff. Okay, I'll turn it over to Nina, who will go through the next round of questions. Thank you, guys.
Mahalo, Lance, and aloha, and thank you to all of our panelists again for your time and insight today. We'll begin our next round of questions, beginning with Jeff Tarpey of United Airlines. Jeff, throughout this pandemic, neighbor islands have been especially cautious in keeping their communities isolated and healthy. With more tourists expected to arrive in the outer islands once quarantine is lifted or testing options are in place, what preventative measures is United taking to keep neighbor island employees safe in order to maintain the larger community?
Right. Okay. I think you're right. I mean, what we want to do is keep our employees safe. They're here to serve one another, whether it's at home, whether it's with extended family, but also with the people that they come into contact with through all the industry. Things that we've done, like for instance, in the past 6 months, right, we were able to gain an exemption to temporarily suspend our flights. What that allowed us to do is to keep our employees safely away and on an on-call status. Then July 1st, at 2 of our stations, we were able to resume with just 1 small flight a day at minimum staffing, and now we're growing back to reopening up Lihui later this week, and we'll have still a very minimal presence. And when employees come into work, what they'll find that even for those that have been away, there are some differences. We maintain all of the guidelines on social distancing, temperature screening. We make sure masks are part of everyday life where we're in and around people, including on board our flights. And with this partnership with the Cleveland Clinic and Clorox, that we've got our Clean Plus program, there's a lot more sanitation and a lot more just common sense when it comes to being clean and being safe here. I think one other thing is we've added some leniency to our attendance policies so that, if people can't come into work, they shouldn't. And obviously we need to run our business, but at the same time, we need to remove some of that pressure of exposing people who are sick, being in and around our general public here. But we've been first in a lot of things in the industry around cleanliness, and we're going to continue to try to work hard at that.
Great, thank you, Jeff. It's exciting to hear about a lot of the new initiatives that airlines are taking. Our next question is for Shibata-san. Shibata-san, after 6 months hiatus, ANA flew on October 6th to Hawaii and plans to fly on October 19th. Are there any more plans for these types of flights in November?
Yes, ANA has scheduled 2 dates for total 4 flights in November. Flight 186 from Haneda to Honolulu on November 6th and 20th. Flight 185 from Honolulu to Haneda on November 7 and 21. These flights are not for leisure travel, but for business travelers or citizens of Japan that would like to travel back for various reasons. So not focused on tourism. So this is the current situation.
Great, thank you, Shibata-san. As Sandy mentioned, we're all very excited to see flights resuming to and from Japan. Daniel, next question is for you. During our first webinar with Hawaii's economic leaders, there was some discussion around infected passengers potentially spreading germs or virus with others en route during flights. And I know you briefly mentioned this during your opening remarks. Do you have any additional insight that could help appease this concern for any travelers who are concerned to travel still?
Yeah, I think it's a very natural concern and thought that people have, right? And but I think, you know, once you sort of really understand how air circulates and is filtered on airplanes, you really do see that, you know, most viruses and germs don't spread very easily on flights. So, you know, that in combination with what we've been talking about with regards to layers of safety, right? If everyone were to wear their mask, right? If universal mask wearing was really adopted by everyone, the amount of risk goes dramatically down as well. We already know there's a low risk of transmission on board. And so when you put things like the mask, when you put things like, you know, limiting the amount of interaction that we have on board between our flight crews and our guests, all of those things together is really what helps to minimize that spread. And hopefully that, you know, helps to appease folks as they start thinking about flying again.
Great, thanks, Daniel. Our next question is for Avi. Avi, Hawaiian Airlines recently resumed three weekly flights from Narita, Japan to Hawaii. Do you have any information on what type of passengers are traveling and the purpose of these flights?
Yeah, so one of the really interesting things as context about operating an airline during this period of time has been that while passenger demand has dropped to almost nothing, cargo demand has remained very strong, and more so because so much of the belly capacity for airlines has gone away as airlines have grounded their flights. And so we have actually been operating cargo-only flights to Korea, to Japan on a fairly regular basis, to other destinations in the Asia Pacific region. And we just leave the upstairs part of the airplane empty and fill the downstairs part. And so we've been operating on that basis for some time. As Shibata-san mentioned, there are some essential travel needs for Japanese nationals between Japan and Hawaii. And for us, because we were already operating these flights on a cargo-only basis, the additional cost to serve guests on those flights was relatively low. And so what we've seen is a relatively small number of passengers, but some demand, all Japanese nationals, some in many cases living in Hawaii wanting to go back and visit family. Obviously, there's a quarantine required on both sides. And so it is a small market, but one that we felt it was important to serve. Hawaiian, prior to COVID, was the second largest air carrier between Japan and Hawaii. It's grown to be a very large part of our business and a very important part of our business. And so we felt like it was important to continue to connect those people who needed to travel between Hawaii and Japan.
Great, thank you, Avi. And our last panel question is for Tim. Tim, what airports around the US would you consider to be a model airport in terms of COVID management, and what factors make them such?
Well, I'll start by answering that question with that Hawaii was actually the first state in the country to implement the mandatory quarantine, and the Hawaii airport system is the first in the country as well to install the temperature screening equipment. So Hawaii has been actually progressive, and a lot of the other airports, you know, have been following suit with some of those measures. Certainly, every airport out in the country and the world, for that matter, is you know, facing difficult decisions. Certainly, you have to balance the health and safety of the public and employees, which is the primary concern, with obviously continuing to operate and have the facilities available and open. But if you have to, I think, compare, the closest one would be Alaska, because they too have a safe travels program that they implemented. It's similar, but some of the differences are all of the non-residents that enter the state are required to take the test. Returning residents have the option to take the test, or they can just do the 14-day quarantine if they like. And they there's been variations of this plan. You know, I will say that they have been very progressive as well. But even with all the kind of stringent measures that they've taken, you know, it still doesn't mean there's 0 cases coming in, right? And I don't think anyone out there can tell you that you can get that down to 0 as far as the positivity rate from people coming in. It is very low, especially coming into Hawaii. But no matter how many different precautions and measures you take, it's just not going to get to 0. I will also add, though, that from the traveling community, the visitors, at least in hearing discussions from the Department of Health, the visitor themselves is not the main culprit of those ones transmitting the virus into the Hawaii. In most cases, it's the returning residents, and then those residents, you know, possibly going to big gatherings and spreading it that way. So that's just a little bit more perspective from that end.
Sure, thanks, Tim. And it's great to hear about, you know, Hawaii's efforts becoming really a front runner in terms of changing the way that we travel these days. Next, we're going to move on to our Q&A portion of the webinar. Thank you to for all of your wonderful questions online. We'll try to answer as many as possible. There's one question that came in from Stuart Yurton, and this is for the airline executives. Do we have a projection of how long it will take to get back to pre-COVID levels? Avi, can we start with you?
Sure, thanks, Stuart. I think it's a little hard, and we're an industry that is very forecast intensive because of how much capital we deploy with our aircraft and the people intensity of our business. We spend a lot of time on forecasts. I think it is very difficult for us right now to put forward a definitive forecast. We've sort of stopped using that word internally, and we talk a lot about planning assumptions because what we have is a range of different things, and much of the outcomes are things that are out of our control. It's the progression of disease in our community. It's how well we do at managing it. It's how effectively the state implements its pre-travel testing program. And so we have a range of different outcomes that we look at. I think we've talked before publicly about being somewhere between 15 and 25% smaller in the summer of next year. But that's a planning assumption too. And frankly, the key for us, and I think probably for a lot of businesses in our community, is going to be to maximize our flexibility and our optionality so that as circumstances emerge, we have resources to go and take advantage of them and make sure that we're being as commercially effective as possible. So no really clear forecast for Q4. We are seeing some modest increases in demand for travel, but it's coming very close in. I think because of some of the uncertainty and confusion about pre-travel testing and what people can do in the state at the moment. And so hopefully that starts to spread out and makes it easier for us to forecast. But right now, we're just trying to make sure that we are as flexible and dynamic as possible in our planning.
Sure, thanks, Avi. Shibata-san, did you have anything to add?
Yes, according to the latest forecast on the IATA, Transportation Association, more than 2 years to recovery needed. But especially in Hawaii, as I mentioned in my presentation, to remove the restriction is the most important. So it means that both countries 14 days quarantine. So it is a minimum level. So we are waiting for early relaxation.
Thank you, Shibata-san. Jeff or Daniel, did you have anything to add from your perspectives?
Yeah, I could jump in. Just company-wide, for the fourth quarter, we're probably looking to be about 40 to 50% smaller. And then similar to what Avi said, for the summer of 2021, we're about projecting right now about 20% smaller as a company, looking at capacity as that measure.
Yes,
Thanks,
and good points. And I would add that, we're similar. We're down, we're operating at least 30% smaller right now. And we really are waiting for a vaccine to create, a real rebound in meaningful demand. The bright spot would be this: since the announcement of the pre-travel testing, we did see an increase in bookings. And as Avi mentioned, or one of the others, it's typically close in.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, so to Nina's point, that is probably the most repeated question, is people asking on what the rebound looks like and what the bookings look like. So there's also questions on the hotel side, obviously, that we can't answer. And I think the panelists have indicated that we see some uptick, but it's very close in. It would be very hard to tell you, exactly how many people are going to come in when. So there's also a number of questions on testing and what the requirements are and who the partners are for each of the airlines. And I'll ask the airline panelists to speak on that, but I'm pretty sure that every airline's website will have the information that the listeners need. Anybody want to start with what the individual programs look like at each airline for pre-testing?
Sure, I can start. Hawaiian has announced a couple of different options for our guests. We have a partnership with a company called Vault Health, who does mail-in test kits for people who aren't going to be close to another testing option. You can get the kit mailed to you, and it's a saliva test. The other option that we are doing is rolling out a group of physical labs for drive-through testing. Will be up in Los Angeles and San Francisco. I think, by next week at the latest. We probably are not going to be ready for the 15th at the moment, but we are working very hard to get those physical labs up. At the end of the day, I think what matters most is that there are choices for people. So the state has a number of partnerships with CVS and Walgreens. We're not particularly fussy about where people get tested, as long as it's a trusted partner of the state. But it's important that there be choice and that there be competition, because ultimately that's what's going to drive down the cost of testing and improve its availability to consumers, which is going to be critical to the economic recovery of the state.
Thank you, Avi. Any other?
Yeah, we absolutely agree on choice and accessibility of tests. We have focused all of our testing partnerships right now out of Seattle, because that's where all of our flights are originating out of. And so we have two partnerships, one with Carbon Health. They're offering pop-up testing, pop-up rapid testing in Seattle. And then we also have Bartell Drugs, which is offering testing within 3 of their locations within the Seattle area. And then we do have plans to ramp up over the next few weeks as we do add more service up and down the West Coast in key markets like San Diego, San Jose, Portland, and being able to offer those options to our guests out of those cities. But as Avi said, we also are promoting all of the other states' trusted testing partners because options are very much important to our guests.
Thanks, Daniel. Anyone else want to comment on that before we turn it over to Nina, who has a question for Tim?
Lance, real quick, I would say for United, our customers through San Francisco, our big gateway, can participate with Go Health Urgent Care. That's the rapid one, and it's over near the international terminal there. The other is a drive-through testing administered by Color. The rapid is a bit more expensive, but the convenience of having a result in 15 minutes. Whereas the other one with Color is fantastic. A little bit more time involved, about 48 hours for the turnaround time.
Thank you, Jeff. Good information. A lot of people have been asking about the pre-testing, so I think this is very valuable. All right, Nina.
Great, thanks, Lance. Tim, you have a bit of a unique perspective being on this panel with airlines, and you're coming from the government background. There's one question that came in from Sharon Guo. Maybe you can help to share your perspectives. Are there any new programs or policies that will be implemented to prevent a total shutdown of our industry if something like this happens again?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Sharon. So from the HDOT perspective, obviously everything that was being done with quarantine or restrictions is all with the health and safety in mind. I mean, that is the top priority. Prior to all that was being done, clearly the HDOT leadership was part of the discussion and did caution against the profound impact that having these restrictions and quarantine would have on the travel industry, the airline partners, and everyone who relies on tourism and that visitor industry. And so clearly that was warned against, and something, you know, that was a fear. Of course, during a pandemic like this, that the health and safety did take the priority. It's also why you see so much discussion right now from the governor on down, even continuing. And we're a couple days out from the October 15th, and there's still discussion about it. It's also why you've seen the relaunch or restart date postponed, because a lot of that is you don't want to go backwards, right? No one in the state wants to go backwards. Once you have these programs in place and they're launched, you want to keep going and you want to build momentum forward. Clearly, it would hurt again if you have to go backwards. And I'm not saying that won't happen, but that's what everybody is working towards, not going backwards. And so that is kind of the perspective of the state. It is a very cautious approach, but please know that the travel industry, the visitor industry, and impacts to that aspect of the economy is certainly taken into consideration in all the aspects that are going. You know, as far as specific policy decisions, those that do come from the governor's level, the federal level, if there's any additional stimulus measures. And so the advice there is to clearly, if you're a business owner, to continue to pay attention and follow those, and then apply right away if there are additional policy-making decisions that come about.
Can I just add before we close that one out? You know, I think one of the, you know, the travel industry and the airports have done a lot of work to make sure that we can keep incoming travel as safe as possible. Over the summer, we got to 300 to 400 cases a day through nothing but community spread. And so if we want to remain open and get our economy started, it is not just about hardening our ports and our port places of entry. It is about making sure that we in the community remain vigilant, wear masks, stay distanced, and do the very basic things that we know can prevent community spread. And so I think that's incredibly important for all of us who care about the success of this reopening to keep in mind.
Great points. Thank you, Avi. Thanks, Tim.
Okay, we've probably got time for just maybe one more question. And there's a question from Thomas Sweat about marketing work from Hawaii. And I think it was covered in the first session. And I don't think there's anybody here that was or can answer that question. But yes, it was brought up that Hawaii should be marketed as a first step as a work from Hawaii destination. So let's see if there's anything else from Toby or Sandy that they see in the questions that they think is pertinent.
Hi, Lance. No, I think you've done a great job at carrying, bringing up a wide variety of questions. Thank you.
Okay, with that, I will turn it back to Sandy and Toby. Thank you.
Mahalo, mahalo. I was playing with my airplane. Sorry, I was like all distracted with my ANA airplane here.
Oh, Toby, how did you get that ANA balloon? How cute.
Oh, VIP status. Thank you, Shibata-san.
Okay, Toby, I think it's time to put the balloon away and welcome everybody back. Thank you for your questions. They were on point and exactly what we needed to hear.
Yes, they were. As we mentioned earlier, these free webinars are brought to you by the University of Hawaii Shidler College of Business and Travel Industry Management Alumni Associations. Please make sure you check out our new fundraising campaign called Shidler Strong, started this week, Thursday.
Now, if you would like to rewatch any part of this webinar, a recording will be posted on the Shidler College page on Vimeo. You can find out our 2 past webinars, overview of the reopening of tourism, as well as our focus on health and safety there. Registration for our next webinar, Impacts to the Hotel Industry, will begin tomorrow morning. It will be next week, Tuesday at a special time, 10 a.m. Again, this is a special time, 10 a.m. So put that in your calendars now.
The lineup of speakers is amazing. It includes Mufi Hanneman of the Hawaii Lodging and Tourism Association, Kelly Sanders of Highgate Hotels, Linda Rodriguez of Hilton Grand Vacations, Elliot Mills of the Alani Resort, and Tom Kalami of Marriott Hotels. Really amazing panel. Please note this is a special 10 a.m. panel next week, Tuesday. You'll also receive an email with registration. And because of feedback from you, we're going to open up an 8th webinar on November 17. Stay with us. We're looking at possibly doing a subject on activities, events, and wedding, a very struggling market here for the tourism industry.
Thank you to our panelists for sharing your guidance and providing us with hope as we move forward through this time together. And thank you to all those in attendance. We appreciate your questions and all that you're doing to reopen our economy safely. See you next week.